Hello everybody, thank you for watching. I appreciate you very much. Today we're going to talk about some relational concepts, mainly data domain, physical and logical domains, what they are, what they're all about, how can you use them. Let's continue on with our vehicle example and talk a bit about data domains. So a data domain is based on the column in the table. So here's a VIN, and then there's a license plate, and then there's a make and a model and a year and an MSRP. And the data domain, it consists of two pieces. It consists of the physical domain, that is the way that the database actually stores the data. Does it store it as characters? Does it store it as numbers? Does it store it as dates? This is generally like the data type of the column. And then there's the logical domain, that is what makes sense to be entered into the column. And this is a little more difficult to enforce as opposed to the physical domain. So physical domain is usually enforced in a table through the data types. And you can see we have, data types like short text and number and currency. We can also pick a Boolean value or date time. Or it can also be a binary object or a big piece of text. Like if you're going to store a file that got attached, like a picture of the vehicle, right? We can store that as well. So there's different data types, and these represent the physical domain. But physical domain only gets us so far in our table. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. If I were to go back here and let's change this year to 2030, I don't know, maybe people are watching this video 10 years from now, but right now it's 2020. And so if I go to enter this, it's too far in the future. There's no car made in 2030. And I have a rule that says must be between 2010 and 2021. That's basically a rule that I set over this column. That's an example of logical domain. Now, the physical domain is you put a number in here. The logical domain is it has to be between 2010 and 2021. So another great example of this is let's put an MSRP in of, let's try to get this car for, like negative $100. That means you owe me $100, I buy this car. We don't want that to be entered as a value. It only makes sense if these vehicle prices are bigger than zero. So let me show you how to add that as a rule. First of all, I need to undo that so that it's back the way it was. Let's go back here to design view. So there are different types of data integrity constraints that you can put over these values. Like I can go over this MSRP and then put in a check constraint. In this particular DBMS, it's called a validation rule. And I can say I want that to be bigger than zero. And let's save that. And we go back here. And I change this to minus 500. And it says you can't do that because you have violated a validation rule. Validation rules are a way to put an expression on values in the table so that they need to be true. The Boolean expression that you put on the table must be true before the data can be written to the table. It's a great way to enforce that logical domain. Okay, another example is we don't want the same license plate to go in. Yeah, we have a VIN that tracks entity integrity. Bear with me while I type. Okay, we added another car, and we can't add this because it violates this primary key constraint. But if I were to put a different VIN in here, right? Now it just enters it. And this is a problem because the logical domain of license plate is such where we do not want two vehicles to have the same license plate. So how can we enforce a rule like that? First and foremost, let's change this license plate to something that is not unique so that we can actually put the rule in place. Because you can't have data that violates the rule. And now this case, we're going to put a unique constraint on here, and I think I know how to do this. It says indexed here, and we're going to say no duplicates. Okay, that's how in this database you set what's called a unique constraint over the data. And I will go back and save it. And now if I go in here and try to use the same license plate, I get an error when it tries to save because I cannot have duplicate values on license plate. So that's another example of enforcing logical domain. So again, physical domain, data type, logical domain is basically the set of acceptable values in that column. It's very hard to enforce logical domain, but there are several approaches that we can use to do that, mainly unique constraints and check constraints. And we're going to learn the third one in a bit.